Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode, drum roll, please, 241, season 5, episode number, come on, you know the number, season 5, episode 28. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good week. The week here has been like a lot of weeks here. Just, you never know what's going to happen. Wild, crazy. Every day now there's a siren. The Houthis of Yemen, something to name that a couple of years ago probably never would have known. Just trying to disrupt and interrupt and cause difficulty in our lives here. It's mostly just annoying, but obviously scary. There's no question about it. Ballistic missiles are nothing to take lightly, and firing them at us on a daily basis is not something that we should take lightly, and we don't, thankfully. And I appreciate very much and thank very much our armed forces who are daily, moment to moment, watching over us, securing our lives, giving us the opportunity to live freely here in our homeland. That said, we have a podcast to share and an idea to put out there. And our topic of the week is unqualified, leading when you don't fit the ideal. Different kind of approach to an aspect of leadership that we don't think about consciously, but something that we definitely feel just below the surface when we look at and think about who should be or who shouldn't be a leader in this world. And we have a vision, an image, an idea of what that person should or shouldn't look like to play that role. And whether or not that's legit or made up or something that's real or not real, I think is worthy of the conversation and the discussion. And it takes us inside this week's presentation. I want to start off with the following narrative. It's a made-up story about a teacher. We're going to call her Leah, just because in desiring to have this opening narrative, I asked ChatGPT for a name, and this is the name it spit out. I have no idea why. But I want you to appreciate this person for a second. Leah is a brilliant educator. She is passionate. She is principled. She is creative. She is the person everyone in her department turns to when things get tough, when things get rough. Parents trust her. Students love her. Colleagues seek her guidance. She's just on the young side. And so everyone assumed that when the department chair seat opened up, that Leah would be a shoo-in for it. And so when she didn't get it the first time, okay, she didn't get it the first time. And when she didn't get the department chair seat the second time and the third time, eyebrows started to be raised. Under the surface, she started to hear that she didn't, quote unquote, look the part. She wasn't polished enough, strategic enough. Maybe you're just not leadership material. I wonder about that. So eventually, when the opportunities to advance came her way, she stopped applying for them. She shied away. But she didn't actually stop leading. She continued to mentor teachers. She continued to speak up in meetings. She continued to be the emotional backbone of her department, of her team, of her school. She continued to be adored by parents and students alike. And so even though the door to her room didn't say leader on it, and the door to leadership never opened, she still led. You can still lead even if you're not the leader. That's one way to think about it. And you can still lead and be a leader even if you don't, quote unquote, look like a leader. So it takes us into the notion in the Bible this week, which is an incredibly complex and difficult subject to discuss, which is the disqualified priest. We've talked a lot about the priests over the course of this year. We talked about Aaron. We talked about his sons. We talked about the clothing. We talked about the role of the priest. And here in the Bible this week, it tells us about the disqualified priest. Chapter 21 in Leviticus tells us, no man among the offspring of Aaron the priest who had a defect shall come near to offer the Lord's offering. He may eat of the food of his God, but he shall not come near to offer it on the altar. the service for which he is meant to serve, the role that he is to play as a priest, is denied this person. It's like being, second in line to the chair of the throne and never getting the throne. Probably worse. What's the reason for the person being disqualified? One might imagine that they had done something wrong, that they had violated some moral code, that they had been unethical in their actions and in their dealings. Less than righteous, maybe. And so they're deemed unfit for the role. But that's not what the Bible tells us. The Bible tells us that they're eliminated or excluded for blindness or lameness or disfigurement, skin diseases, deformities, physical blemishes, physical imperfections, physical flaws, not moral, not spiritual. Many things that the person is simply born with and not of their doing, and certainly not of their choosing. So they're excluded from the role because of maybe a DNA defect, or God forbid something happened during childbirth. I mean, that's hard. It's hard to accept. As a result of which, he cannot perform the sacrificial services at the altar, which is a major part of the role of being a priest. He can't enter certain areas of the temple, certainly during certain services that are going on. Lead the public rituals, can certainly never be the high priest. Excluded from majority of the role for which the person was born. So you can be a Torah scholar, you can be a moral exemplar, you can be the best of the best in every single other way, but the fact that you have some sort of odd physical deformity excludes you. Yes, the person remains a priest. Yes, they're able to eat of the sacred portions of food. Yes, they can teach the Torah. They can issue Jewish law rulings. They can be a spiritual guide. They can be a person of support and of wisdom, of communal leadership. They might still be able to apply and give they're still part of the family of priests. They're not unworthy of being a priest, but they're not assigned the role of leadership that in theory belongs to them, that they are born into. And so imagine being born into a family where your entire lineage is about sacred service, and from a young age, dude, it's not going to happen for you. You're not going to get to go up to the altar. You can bear the name, you can wear the lineage, you can hold the history, but you cannot have the role. Certain family names in the Jewish community are known to be families of descendants of Aaron, of the priests. That's their lineage. That's their heritage. So you're in that family and you can't do that job. That picture for just a second to the modern moment. Take a soldier who fought in battle, lost a hand over the last 2 years. Play it forward now. Someday in the future, the temple is rebuilt. The priestly service is taking place and he's excluded. Not because of some moral defect, but because he was injured protecting his people. It doesn't sit well. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. As an example of what that is, I would think the opposite. I would think that the priest who is the amputee, who walks on prosthetics, who saved the lives of his soldiers, of his family, of his friends, of his community, would be exactly the person I would want there. And yet they're excluded. Or not the soldier, simply a person who's born with some sort of a defect. Whatever that is, some physical disability that they're born with. But they are of the highest spiritual level. They are, from a moral and ethical, the most righteous, the most worthy, the most deeply connected to God. Or how inspirational it would be to see a person serving in the temple who has physical, even some mental disability, might be inspired, might be moved, might force me, push me to some higher level of aspiration, of accomplishment. And yet, no. Can imagine for the person itself, it creates a profound sense of dissonance. They have the name, they have the lineage, they have the history, they don't have the role. It could shape some form of resentment potentially for them on all the system, that level of unfairness that is attached to it. It definitely forces the person to consider, what role do I have to play if I can't play that role? How do I lead? Or can I even lead if I can't do the role that I was born to play? Hopefully, it pushes the person to a deeper emotional, spiritual, intellectual, moral, relational level. And we can say that the person isn't removed, but they are rerouted on some level. That they're not banished, but they're only barred from a single role. Any of that we can't fully understand. I remember giving a speech about this almost 20 years ago in a synagogue, talking about this issue. I certainly was unqualified then to talk about it. I'm certainly unqualified now. And so the why of it is certainly not something that we can go to. So the Bible limits the person, reroutes the person, acknowledges the person's place in the family, but puts a fence around the role that that person can play. Not disowned, he's redirected in some level. His sacredness, in truth, if we want to give it a positive spin, his sacredness is not tied to the ritual performance. It's tied to the identity simply being of the priestly family. He belongs, he matters, he still carries the holiness, he doesn't have the platform. And even sometimes, if you don't have the platform, you are still part of the mission. And because you're still part of the mission, your role in leadership still matters. So for the priest, it's a whole set of questions and deep reflections that they have to go to. And for the rest of us who are thinking about this, listening to this, wondering about this, thinking about how this might apply to us, has this ever happened to you where you have been told either directly or indirectly, the message was received by you that you don't look like a leader for whatever reason? You're not tall enough. You're not good looking enough. You're not physically fit. You're not male. You're not white. You're not the right faith. Any of those things that can be either subtly or not so subtly told to you that dismiss you from leadership, race, religion, community, whatever it is. Don't dismiss it. Don't dismiss it. We've all probably done it. We thought, we cringe a little bit. That's the guy. That's the person. We don't know why we think that. But something about it says, they don't fit. That's not the leader. And yet they are. So flip that over. Have you ever led in a space? This is the part that I do with coaching. Have you ever led in a space where in that space you were refused the name of leader or the role of leader? You led anyway, but you weren't called the leader. You had no power. You weren't looking for influence, but you provided that through your leadership, your guidance, and your person, but you weren't officially the leader. Take it a step further. Been in a situation where your blemish, quote unquote, has become the source of your empathy, your wisdom, and your connection. People see you better because of your quote unquote deformity, like the priest. Let's take it 2 steps further even. What role do you keep waiting for someone else to give you that you may already be fulfilling? So they haven't knighted you, quote unquote, but you're already doing it. You're already leading the team. You just don't have the title. You're already the captain of the ship, No one called you that. You stepped into the role unofficially and for an extended period of time. But for some reason, you're waiting for the title to be bestowed upon you as if that really makes a difference. What are you holding back? What voice, what message, what idea, what program, what project? Not because it isn't ready or fully formed or good to go, but because you weren't yet invited in to the space of the role. So what we have to appreciate here, really important value, is that leadership isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing to lead anyone. A lot of the time, we're waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for somebody to tell us. We're waiting for somebody to give it to us. And the reality in many of those cases is simply we just have to take it, seize it, not out of a place of arrogance, but of a place of need. Something has to happen. Someone has to do it. And so we need to step into that space, even though we're unworthy or we don't belong or we're unqualified, quote unquote. So let's think for a moment about some of the principles that are at play here in this that sit at the core of how we have to think about it. Number one is that the mold is a myth. We imagine perhaps that leadership has to look a certain way, has to feel a certain way, has to sound a certain way. Whether that's a sharp suit, that's a perfect speech, that's a certain kind of presence. But the Bible is certainly telling us otherwise. In the case of this priest, but in other places with other people, Moses has a speech impediment. Yet, he's the one who leads the people out of Egypt. He's the one over the course of 40 years delivers some of the most memorable speeches in the history of man. David, who is to become the great king leader of the people later on, is the youngest and overlooked brother, the youngest and overlooked son, the person who the prophet coming, Samuel, doesn't think is the person who's to be the king. But God saw David's heart and didn't look for the height. John Maxwell writes on Giant Shoulders that David didn't fit in the armor of King Saul, and that's a good thing because David didn't belong in the armor of King Saul. He didn't look like the first king that was selected. He looked like David. He became King David, not Saul II. And we're better off for it. To be the leader that David needed to be, he had to wear the armor that David could only wear, which wasn't the armor that Saul had worn, nor the weaponry that Saul had used. The mold of leadership is crafted and created by people, but the leadership itself and the leaders themselves who play those roles throughout the course of history, for the most part, break those molds. The mold is created by people. If you want to get religious about this, the mold is created by people. The leadership is created by God. If you don't want to be religious about it, that's totally fine too. But use the lesson of the Bible to tell you that there is no mold. You create it as you go. And so leadership ultimately then is not about the optics. It's about the ownership. The ownership creates the leader, and then the optics change to mirror or to enwrap or to enlarge in the image and the understanding and the vision of who and what that leader represents, not the other way around. When we choose leadership based on the optics, we often get the empty suit that we've chosen. So we have to choose the person who's going to own it, to choose the person who's going to actually be accountable and responsible, who's going to take the risk, and then watch the optics flip based on the fact that the person chooses to lead. Principle number 2, being excluded from one thing does not mean being disqualified completely. There are roles in the world that you may not be invited to. That doesn't mean you've been removed from leadership. It means you've been asked to lead differently. And it's certainly not something that somebody wants to hear when it is that they want to lead in a specific role. They want to be the captain. They want to be the lieutenant. They want to be the head of the team, the leader of the division, the CEO, the head of the board, the elected official. So it sounds hollow. It sounds trite. It sounds like something I don't want to accept. But I think that's only true when we have a very limited vision and definition of what leadership. If leadership means only that you are the leader when you stand at the altar, then yes, you've been excluded. But if leadership means service and vision and connection and courage, responsibility, accountability, ownership, then that door is never closed. Speak into the circle and into the mic and into the community in which you are living and leading already. It's not about title. It's leadership too in that way. So principle number one is the mold is a myth. Principle number two means that being excluded from a particular role does not mean disqualification. Principle number three is that the blemishes do make us connectable. We assume sometimes, and inappropriately so, that leadership is something about perfection. But real leadership is more about connection. And it's not about being polished that makes us feel safe. It's about being honest. Most often, it's about the people who carry their wounds with them and still show up to serve. We do trust people perhaps more when they've been through something. And they've been through that something and they're still standing. They're still fighting weakness. That's the leadership. The flaws that the person has, I think, make them, to use a term, relatable. And the broken ones are often the most whole. That's why the blemish priest is still holy. He's still included. He's still vital. He still has a role to play, just not that role. We don't follow people because they're perfect. We follow them because they're present with us in the struggle. Such a crucial point. Think about for just a second, currently in the current world, who are the people that are actually the leaders? Not the ones that have the power, formally and officially. Who are the ones who are actually leading? Who are the ones that we connect to? Even politicians, people in industry, people in our community. Are they perfect? Not perfect. If you're a person of faith, you look at the Bible, is Moses perfect? Moses is not perfect. No one there is perfect. The Bible is full of all of the quote unquote dirty laundry of the people who are our forefathers and our matriarchs. We still think of them as righteous, even if they're flawed. They're still the leaders of who we are, even if they have quote unquote deformities or things that we might think make them unqualified. And so when we think about it, why do we think about ourselves as being unqualified? And so the main one always is the idea of imposter syndrome. Dr. Valerie Young is a leading expert on the phenomenon known as imposter syndrome. And she is the author of The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, and the founder of actually the website impostersyndrome.com. Check that one out. In her book, she talks about how it is that high achieving individuals, particularly women, often feel like frauds, attributing their success to luck rather than to their competence. People feel like they're faking it. There's a sense of fear that they'll be found out ultimately and wonder, what are you doing here? And it's very common in non-traditional leaders, in minorities, and in women. And it's rooted most often in the notion that there is an idea that there has to be perfection. There is no perfection. There is no perfect. Perfect is a lie. The reality of the imposter syndrome, we discussed imposter syndrome at great length early on in Coaching the Bible and multiple times over the course of years. The key insight about imposter syndrome is that feeling unqualified doesn't mean that you actually are unqualified. More often than not, it means that your inner standards are either too rigid and that your sense of external affirmation is missing, but the truth that your leadership is actually not absent. Sorry. I don't know. I'm recording this at a funny hour and my brain is not fully formed this morning yet. The truth is that imposter syndrome means that you're human. And so you have set a standard for yourself that's very, very high, which is commendable, but maybe too high, leaning towards perfect, which is not commendable. And you have created a rigidity around what it has to be and what it has to look like that is unfair and puts you in a position of failure when in fact you're already succeeding and you're already leading. And it makes it difficult to actually succeed. And then flip it over for just a second. What if the feeling of being disqualified is actually like the birthplace, the seat, the root, the heart of your deepest leadership capacity? Maybe it's because you feel like you're not worthy or you're unqualified, which is what pushes you to actually lead. Here's a second framework, not like imposter syndrome, which is called quiet leadership. Yes, that's actually a term that is coined. Joseph Badaracco is a professor of business ethics at Harvard, introduced this concept of quiet leadership in his book called Leading Quietly. He shows that many of the most effective leaders never hold positional power. They lead through moral courage. They lead through quiet resilience. They lead through small, consistent acts that build trust. Think about your communal leaders. Do they hold power? I don't think they have any. They certainly hold influence. They certainly have the opportunity for input. They can do a lot. But true leadership happens in small, quiet, daily decisions that are made under pressure and most often made without authority. It happens for people who aren't flashy. They're people who are steady. They're quiet. They're connected. They're relatable. They're people who are thinking about the long term, people thinking about getting things done, people who don't care about the accolades, people who live in the space of quiet acts of courage. They take responsibility. They speak truth gently. And they build a trust with the team and the teammates and the people around them without any sense of fanfare. That kind of leadership isn't any less than. It's just way deeper. We know so many people like that, quiet leaders. The third principle framework that we want to think about here in just a second is adaptive leadership, which maybe gets a lot more headlines than quiet leadership. Adaptive leadership, which was developed and introduced by also two professors at the Harvard Kennedy School. I think it's Ron Heifetz and Linsky. It teaches that leadership is not about authority. It's about helping people confront difficult realities and growth through challenge. The adaptive leader often operates outside the formal system, working through the resistance, the discomfort, and ambiguity to mobilize change. And leadership, in truth, is not about authority. It's about mobilizing people to face the difficult challenges. Often the adaptive leader is operating outside the system and is actively trying to reshape or even change the system. It's the revolutionary spirits very often. You have to be mindful and careful of some of them, certainly, but very much accurate. They lack the formal legitimacy, the traditional legitimacy, but they lead because they care more about purpose than they do care about the platform. And so when we think about real world leaders who fit this space, there's all kinds of people who were leaders who were quote unquote unqualified as leaders, who didn't fit the mold, who didn't look the part. You want to talk about politics? Think about Abraham Lincoln for just a second. They talk about the physical nature of Abraham Lincoln, ungainly, pressed, failed multiple times, but he led the United States of America through its darkest hour, the Civil War. I like this example just because I think it works, because it's so out of the box to think that Mr. Rogers was a leader. But Mr. Rogers was a leader in his gentle, soft-spoken, non-traditional way, which I think when people look at him today, sitting on a couch, talking to puppets, speaking softly on a television screen, wearing his sweater, I think it odd. But he built generations of children who were resilient and kind. Leah, the teacher we talked about at the beginning. From the Bible, talk about Miriam for just a moment. She doesn't have the same status as Moses. Yet she leads with dignity, with prophecy, profound spiritual resonance. She is a leader on the people. She has no power. She has no formal community even. And so leading from those outside spaces isn't a consolation prize. It's actually often where the deepest change begins. And so for us as people in our communities, in our spaces, in our lives, we have to think very much about how this works for us. We have to look at ourselves to think about how we do the inner work, how we develop and build further the leader from within in the spaces and places where we think we're unqualified. So tool number one, and I know I've gone very, very long today, so I appreciate your patience with me and thank you for sticking with me. And if you feel like you need to stop and come back to this podcast at some point later, by all means, go right ahead. That's fine. Totally cool with that. Is what I'll call the role audit. List for yourself 3 roles that you've wanted, but you haven't received. Communal role, professional role, familial role, whatever that may be. Name the role. Give it a title. What is the role? Knowledge that you don't have, it's fine. Ask yourself, what impact am I already having with or without that formal role? So you have defined a certain role, given it a title, understand what that role actually accomplishes. Then you're pivoting it over, looking at what you're actually doing, and are you doing the things that are in that role, you just don't have the title? If that's true, then shift over and think about the value impact, the role that you're actually playing in the lives of others without the title. Now, you should be okay with that. But if you're not, we have to think about understanding what it is about not having the title for you that is so crucial, so vital, so important. That's tool number 1. Tool number 2, I want to reclaim voice. I want you to write down an area where you've stayed quiet because you don't feel qualified. There's a lot of people in the community, let's say, who have stayed quiet over the last 18 months because they don't feel qualified enough to speak up in the space of the war that's taking place. I understand. So maybe it's local to your community where you live. Maybe it's professional in your workplace. You're not qualified. So there's the meeting on a week-to-week basis. You don't speak up. Now, I'm not asking you to now suddenly draw up the courage and actually do it, but I want you to sit for a moment and maybe write down or say and record for yourself the leadership message that you would share if, quote unquote, you were qualified. Just say it. No one has to hear you. No one has to read it. And then ask the question of yourself, what am I waiting for? That was really good. That was really strong. That was really powerful as a message that I just delivered. I really feel like that was meaningful. I feel like people would benefit from it, but I don't have the role. I don't feel qualified. What am I waiting for? Tool number 3, going to the whole blemish thing. What blemish do you have that actually is a bridge? What's the flaw that you have that you believe actually disqualifies you from certain leadership roles? Maybe you think you're too short. Maybe you don't think you're educated. Maybe you don't speak a language. Then ask yourself, how does this actually make me more human, more trustworthy, more relatable, more connectable? And then use that as an opening for connection, not a reason for silence. A good example here, I'm almost 40 minutes in, but I'll actually use this as an example. We were at an event this week at our daughter's seminary. I mentioned this on my other podcast, but I'll mention it here. At our daughter's seminary. And we're sitting among the parents and the students with the teachers going around the room, and the parents had a chance to speak. Now, we live in Israel, and so the language of the land is Hebrew, and our children speak beautiful Hebrew. My wife and I don't yet speak that level of Hebrew. But I'll give my wife, Naomi, a lot of credit. She spoke in Hebrew. And by acknowledging the idea that maybe her Hebrew isn't perfect, that it's not the highest level, that it's an immigrant's Hebrew, way more relatable, way more human, way more trustworthy. way more authentic, and people then lean in to listen. It's an opportunity for connection. It's a bridge, and it's not a reason for silence. When we do this kind of work, which is deeply rooted in self-reflection and in our ability to reconstruct our identity, then it helps the leader reclaim their agency. It helps to reframe their pain around their disqualification, and it helps them to step forward despite doubt. And it helps to then push up their inner authority rather than worrying and seeking external validation. And so a final reflection and a quote: not all sacred leadership is visible. Some of the most vital services happen behind the curtain, quiet, steady, unseen, but not unfelt, and certainly not underappreciated. The disqualified priest still eats of the holy offerings. He still blesses. He still belongs. He doesn't disappear. He simply leads differently. And for most of us, so do we. Time with the quote, as we always do. This is a quote from Brene Brown, who we haven't spoken or haven't mentioned in a long time, but always worthy of a mention. Our imperfections are not inadequacies. They are reminders that we're all in this together. That is Coach of the Bible for this week. I went very, very long this week. I thank you so much for staying with me the entire time. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful, glorious, beautiful, and blessed weekend.